At the time when I was there in school, I don't think there was enough exposure. So when I came to Delhi, started with my college, I think CDF played a very big role in the kind of exposure it gave me. I heard of the term social entrepreneurship for the first time in my life. When you're interested, try the civil services examination once at least.
So impact has somehow always been a part of everything that you've engaged in so far?
Understanding that this experience that CDF gave me was how can we leverage that privilege to serve or at least to solve some of these more complex problems than just kind of selling soap.
Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of our podcast, BADLAAV Unplugged, Conversations That Inspire, presented to you by Connecting Dreams Foundation and the Global Changemakers Collective. This is the podcast wherein we bring to you change makers and leaders in the space of social impact who are creating impact in communities around them. With us today, we have our very first guest, Aayush Kedia. Ayush, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Hi Namrata, thank you for having me here.
Let me introduce you all to Ayush. Ayush is a dynamic social entrepreneur and a passionate change maker who is doing great things in the space of social impact. And something very interesting about Ayush is that he also happens to be an alumnus of CDF Global Changemaker Labs, which is the program that we run across colleges to inspire youth to get engaged in the impact sector. And a very interesting thing about Ayush is also that he happens to be one of the first young change makers to have associated with Connecting Dreams Foundation. So to start off, I'd like to request you to tell us a little bit about yourself, about your journey, starting from SRCC and then going on to join CDF as a young change maker, and then to becoming an entrepreneur who is dabbling in his own venture now.
So first of all, thank you for the generous introduction. I'm Aayush. I come from a small town in West Bengal called Asansol. I spent 18 years of my life over there, post which I moved to Delhi to pursue my undergraduation from SRCC. At the time, I think I got introduced to CDF, Connecting Dreams Foundation, through a cousin of mine, Piyush. I think he got connected with Amit sir, who's the founder here, when he was studying at Hansraj. So through him, I got also introduced to Amit sir. And then we together went for this visit to Pauri, which is a smaller town again in Uttarakhand. And there we actually spent roughly 3 days, 2 to 3 days, setting up a digital library for a school over there. So I think that was my first introduction to social entrepreneurship at large. And I think that had a profound impact in how I started viewing my future and added a tinge of impact to everything that I wanted to do thereafter. Parallelly, what I also started doing when I was at SRCC was this venture called Scribble. It was essentially a brand of notebooks or stationery that we got manufactured and started selling them to different students in the campus, university campus in Delhi. That didn't end up doing very well because of the capital investment involved in how notebooks generally get economical for you to produce. So hence we pivoted to a design firm, which was called Blue Vector. It's a communication design firm which again Piyush, my cousin, and I did together. There we started catering to the branding, social media and other kind of design requirements for starting with college societies to from college societies to people associated with those societies like younger startups from college alums, and then to siblings of those alums who let's say managed restaurants in Delhi, Gurgaon, etc. So kept catering to different kinds of clients in Delhi, NCR and beyond through that journey. As I graduated from SRCC, I continued my journey with Blue Vector. So it continued, but then at some point in time I got very interested in the UPSC. Which is the Union Public Services Commission. So I ended up wanting to become a bureaucrat, and that happened just by chance when I remember on a particular New Year Eve day, one of my friends, he just randomly mentioned to me that you should know, given your interest, try the civil services examination once at least.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of kida that one conversation gave me, but I think right after I made up my mind to at least give it one attempt. So I had a very short stint with the UPSC examination. It didn't work, but largely I think that also built in the inclination to do something in the governance impact space at large. And with that thought process, I had an admit from ISB, so I went there, did my MBA for a year, participated in different kind of societies, was part of the Net Impact Club over there. But I think largely what happened was, by God's grace, I got into a firm which worked in the governance impact space,
right?
Which is Samagra, where I spent the next 5 years after my ISB program. So I ended up working with multiple governments, right from government of Odisha to catering to the tech requirements of multiple governments across the northern part of the country, then working with other governments in the southern part of the country. So spent roughly 5 years there, and then I quit my job in May of this year, post which I started Spirikul. I think so. It's only been 4 or 5 months since I began. It's an early stage, but we're building out Spirikul again as an impact-focused for-profit venture. Yeah.
So impact has somehow always been a part of everything that you've engaged in so far. And we'll talk about ISB, and we also would love to talk about Spirikul in more detail. But let's come back to your roots again, okay? When you say that CDF is a space where you got introduced to social impact, we would like to hear a little more about your experience as a Global Changemaker Lab changemaker. We would like you to tell us a little bit about your experiences with CDF, and also any experience that you would consider a watershed moment of sort, something that has had a lasting impact on you.
Yeah, I think the place where I come from, like I said, Bengal, Asansol, at the time when I was there in school, I don't think there was enough exposure. So when I came to Delhi, started with my college, I think CDF played a very big role in just the kind of exposure it gave me. I heard of the term social entrepreneurship for the first time in my life. I didn't know what it meant. Over time, when I started working with CDF, I realized that what it essentially means that you can build a business while creating impact in a way. And I think that made me very interested in the space to begin with, which is why I pursued working with CDF. Like I said, the first experience was at Podi, where we set up a digital library. That was a very enriching experience in the sense that I got introduced to a new segment of the population that I didn't think of as much earlier. These were all students coming in from rural Uttarakhand, not getting good quality education, but still very sharp, very smart.
Of course, right.
So I think that experience motivated me to start the college chapter of CDF at SRCC. So I, along with other batchmates at SRCC, we started the CDF SRCC chapter back in 2013, I think. And from there on, we took up multiple projects as part of that society. So we started with something called Project Sanjeevani, where it was essentially a market linkage program for women based out of Hapod. So these women, we realized during one of our field visits that they were making a lot of products, edible products, largely things like papad, achar and so on. But these products were not getting connected to the market because of just their lack of background and also the geography that they came from.
The problem that we were facing over here is that consumers generally have a set brand preference for most of the products that they buy.
Moreover, given the limited resources that we had, we could not diversify our distribution network with these products. So
we zeroed down to one single product, that is papad.
So what we tried doing was we started helping them with market linkage. How do we get their high quality products to be sold in markets in Delhi, in different areas, and whatever that needed to be done alongside, including branding, packaging, etc. We started helping them with all of that. So in that journey, I think we, as a team, so while we started, it was just a team of 5-6 members, but then we recruited 30 younger members from college, and it became a team of roughly 40 back then. And as a team of 40, we started going around in the markets of Chandni Chowk, figuring out how papad was sold over there, what kind of raw materials were used, etc. That helped us work back with the community in Hapur, make the product much more, I would say, market ready in a way. And then we helped them with branding, packaging, etc. to thereafter then distribute it to the same people who we did our research with. We also tried to sell it to college hostels, etc., where we came from. That didn't end up working, but it still did give them some exposure to how sales can happen at a much bigger scale than the scale that they were already operating at. I think that itself, that was one of the projects. Similarly, we worked on something called Project Maya, which was around artificial jewelry. So a lot of the women in another part of the same area were working on threading and other kind of jewelry making stuff, but they again it was a very localized initiative where they were doing all of this as a very side thing. It wasn't generating any income per se. So we tried to market that as something called Maya as a brand, and we connected with some of the early e-commerce, local e-commerce, hyper-local e-commerce platforms back then to see if we can sell those jewelry that they make at least to college audience, to the college audience in Delhi. So I think all of those experiences, if we bundle them together, showed me how complex problems exist in the country as of today. And we, I think, as people who get the best of education, I think it's our, at least I think that's the understanding that this experience at CDF gave me, was how can we leverage that privilege to serve or at least to solve some of these more complex problems than just kind of selling soap or doing other things which may not require the complexity or the thinking that our institutions are teaching us. So yeah.
But when we talk about the kind of people who engage in Global Changemaker Labs, essentially we're talking about college-going kids, and most of our chapters are based in Delhi University. So we're talking about a crowd coming from a certain socio-economic context.
Absolutely.
So what we often see across different chapters is that they already have a preconceived notion of what certain communities, which are underserved, so to say, might want. So they already go with a preconceived notion कि हम ये project करेंगे जब हम इस community के पास जाएंगे. So there is often a mismatch between what they are offering and what the need of the community actually is on ground. So how is it that you, as a young college student, were able to maintain that connect, between a community's true requirements and what you were producing to create a successful project?
I think that's a fantastic question, first of all, and I wouldn't say I was successful at that when I was at CDF.
Okay.
While we did engage with the community at a level, I don't think it was by chance that we figured a problem that was generally there. So I think the macro answer is that you have to engage with the community better.
Yes.
But I think when we were at CDF, I don't think we engaged at that level where we really understood those beneficiaries or people with a lot of understanding, with a lot of depth. That is something that I think over the years of all the work that has happened, I think I've been able to gather that whatever problem we solve requires a deep understanding of the user, and therefore extensive user research in the very initial stages is required. So that you are not building something for which there are no takers or something that doesn't solve a problem, which was the intention in the first place.
Yes.
So I think, that's largely, I think a very deep understanding of the user is critical. For us, it was a matter of luck that we stumbled upon something that tended to solve a problem.
Yes. And you did great work. Because these are projects which are running successfully till now. These are projects which have been taken over by the community. They have taken complete ownership of these projects and are running them successfully. And that is the whole idea behind Global Changemaker Labs and behind CDF as a whole, that we bring in young change makers to become facilitators of change, such that the change that is created is systemic. Even when you as a change maker move out of the equation, the process keeps on continuing, the empowerment, it sustains, right? So since we're talking about empowerment and impact, a question that youth today frequently have is that I want to work in social impact, but what path should I take, academically speaking? should I go for a master's in public administration or should I go for a master's in business administration? And Aayush is someone who has gotten his MBA, as he had mentioned, from ISB, a highly selective program, a highly prestigious program in the country. So I would like you to tell our audience, how much do you think formal training in business from ISB has helped you in when you ventured out into the social impact space and when you're starting your own venture now?
So I think it's a tricky question because it's very difficult to attribute what part of your journey leads to what future outcome. So I think it's a very tricky question in that sense. Between MBA and MPA, I think I wouldn't be able to comment on MPA because I've not done that course. It's also a fairly recent course. When I was there when I was doing my graduation or my post-graduation, most people used to pursue MPA from Harvard. I think that was the norm back then. Now I think there are much more Indian universities providing.
There are many local courses as well.
This kind of a course. So I wouldn't be able to comment on MPA as such. If I talk about the MBA program that I went through, I think one or two things stand out, particularly for the context that you're asking this question in. One is, I think, the kind of professors that used to teach at ISB when I was there. I think a lot of them were very, very relevant to this space. For example, I took 2-3 courses, one by Professor Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, who ended up becoming the Chief Economic Advisor of India. So he took one course on finance where he not only captured the nuances of finance, but how finance has an implication on the economy at large, including the bottom billion population. Similarly, I took another course by Dr. Shamika Ravi, who ends up who happens to be a part of the Economic Advisory Council of the PM. So I think some of these professors gave us the perspective of how what we're learning in theory is relevant for societal change at large. I think that is one thing. Second, I think is it gives you a very good analytical framework or mind that you can leverage as you get into the impact space. I think what I typically see missing, and not to kind of judge anyone here, is there are a lot of people who have the right intention. Somebody told me earlier that typically when they hire people, they look at two things. So there is skill and there is will. What I see in the impact space is that there are a lot of people who have will to work in this space. But I think from a skill set point of view, because of practical implications around just compensation, fewer people tend to get in who have the capacity to really solve these complex problems. And hence what ends up happening is you have very high-willed people who may fall short in terms of skill. What ISB or SRCC helped me with is the good skill set, is the right skill set, or rather I would say CDF. It was in some way an incubator for me to take these journeys one after the other. The skill set that is required to work on these complex problems. These problems are not at all simple to solve. They're much more complex than the problems that I would say the creamy, educated population typically looks at.
Yes, and I think that is also a conversation that is very contemporary now, wherein when you talk about measurement of impact, even in conversations around ESG, the question becomes, how do you really measure impact in this domain? How do you say that this organization has created this much impact? How do you quantify impact or standardize it across all sectors? So I think, yes, working in the impact space is something that is very complex and definitely requires specific and specialized skills to be able to deliver real solid change on ground. Yes, but then you have been putting in the work in that direction, so we would like to speak a little bit more and learn a little bit more about Spiricul, your new venture. Could you please tell our listeners a little more about Spiricul?
Yeah, for sure. So I think Spiricul is deeply personal in a way that it has begun. This dates back to when I was in college. I had this fundamental belief that if we have to really make large scale change in the country, or let's say the world at large, I think education is the way to go. Education is kind of the fundamental boilerplate which in a very preventive way tackles all the problems that you see nowadays, whether it's problems I jokingly say, even if it's problems related to climate change, because at the end of the day, everything is linked to behavior. And behavior is something that you can only build through education, good education. So I had this belief that education is very critical. So I always wanted to work in education, but I never really got the opportunity, or I would say found it relevant wherever I was in my journey till Samagra largely. Parallelly, what happened was, when I was at ISB, I got introduced to spirituality. So we used to do Buddhist chanting over there. So there was a smaller group of people who used to meditate together for 15-20 minutes every day in the evening. That was my introduction. But then post that, my cousin introduced me to another spiritual school, through which I got introduced to much more deeper spiritual practices. For example, energy healing, and then the concept of there being a soul. I wasn't aware of all of these things. We used to, obviously, in layman terms, we use these terms, but to really understand the meaning behind each one of them, I think I didn't have that understanding back then. So got introduced to some of these concepts, got very interested, so started reading about them. Started reading more and more literature, watching more videos about these things. Then what happened was, I think, two specific anecdotes that really inspired me to do what I'm doing today. I keep sharing them all the time. One is my sister. So she has two daughters. When she got married, my sister, the first daughter when she had, again, not to say that it's a bad thing, but because of the era in which we are, my niece, elder niece, was very, very hyperactive. It was difficult to kind of contain her energy or to channel it in a good, productive way.
Yeah.
So, and parallelly, my sister got introduced to spirituality at the time. So when she was pregnant the second time, she meditated for her entire pregnancy phase of 9 months.
Okay.
And the kind of impact that phase, or let's say meditation, had on the second niece. She was much more mature, much calmer. In fact, if my sister was bothered about anything, you could find her at a 2-year, let's say, age, coming to my sister and saying, "Kya ho gaya, mama? Pareshan ho gaya?" So it was while it was amusing, it was very, very insightful. And my interest, coupled with that anecdote, nudged me to say that there is definitely something that spirituality does in terms of maturity or grounding that people see around them. Similarly, my wife, I met her when I was at SRCC, then we kind of dated for a while and then got married about 2-3 years back.
Yeah.
After I got married, I got to know that she was introduced to spirituality when she was 2 years old. And the way it's influenced her thinking in life or her worldview, that's also very profound. I think it's made her much more resilient to whatever is happening in life, much more contented with the way life has been for her. So I think these anecdotes, combined with my own deep interest in spirituality, nudged me to think about spirituality as a space that I could potentially work in. And like I said, education was also there at the back of my mind. So these two combined, actually about 2 years back, I had this idea, and it was a sudden intuition in a way, that can I take spirituality and help the mental well-being of children at a younger age. That was how this started. And that has now evolved to what we are trying to do at Spiricul, which is, after all the conversations with parents, after all the conversations with different experts who worked in this field, what we're trying to essentially do is set up Spiricul as a mission-driven for-profit venture to nurture moral values and emotional resilience in children through spiritual and socio-emotional learning in their most impressionable years of birth to 0 to 6. So that's the kind of work we are trying to do. We're still figuring out what solution will work. It's only been 4 months so far. There are some directions in which we already have ideas, but it's not very, very clear right now. So I think the next 1 or 2 months will help us get there. But I think what I've realized in my entire journey, and what I've tried to mimic at Spiricul in a way, is that ethical wealth creation is definitely possible. And that's why I've set it up as a for-profit venture in the first place. So while you're doing good, you can parallelly generate wealth.
Yes.
Wealth doesn't always come with kind of shortcuts or things that are not driven by value. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. But
Absolutely. I think this is a very interesting notion as well, because this is an idea that for me is a first. I had not heard of something like this before we began talking about Spiricul, and I wish you all the luck for Spiricul. And I think the second thing that's very important that you mentioned here is that creating wealth and doing good for society do not necessarily have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Because that is another conversation that is, or I'd say a point of apprehension for kids today when they think about joining the impact space. That is, can I do good and at the same time also do well?
Yeah.
So I think that is also a point that Aayush has addressed very well in his response. For my last question,
Yep.
I would just like to ask you, what is one advice that you would like to give to youth of today who are considering joining the social impact space?
I think I don't know about one advice. I can share a couple of learnings that I've had, which make it better, or I would say more efficient and enriching when you start working in the social impact space. One of them is just the first, in fact there are three things. So the first of them is just deep understanding of your user, which is what I was sharing earlier also. So just pure empathy or deep understanding of your user, which comes with spending enough time with them, knowing the context from which they come, knowing what exactly does their day-to-day life look like, and not assuming anything, because our lives are extremely different from how the people or the users we want to solve for, their lives look like. So I think that is the first learning that I've had, because whatever time and energy you end up spending without, let's say, doing that user research exercise, you will end up building something that's not solving the problem that you started with in the first place. So that is the first learning that I've had. Second is, I think a lot of the learning I've had at ISB or SRCC or rather CDF is how do you bring in good top-down management principles in solving those problems. Once you've understood what the user wants, once you've understood ki user ka problem kya hai, then you can actually bring in those practices to arrive at very sharp, razor-sharp arguments or razor-sharp solutions that can then be potential hypotheses rather that you will test to say that will this solution really solve the problem of my user. So I think that's the second angle. This second angle is where I see a large gap today. A lot of the people today approach problems in a very passionate manner, but passion doesn't deterministically help solve a problem. It does help you stay on for longer, but doesn't necessarily get you to a better solution quicker. So for that, I think just better sharp thinking and structuring of the problem to say what exactly are we solving, what exactly is the problem, and so good problem solving, or I would say management principles that you learn in college, school, etc., those help there. So that's the second broad learning. And the third is pure resilience. I think because you're solving one of the most complex problems, it requires very, very long horizons in terms of effort. So you will have to spend a lot of time working on something, and even then it may not work. And it's very difficult to attribute whatever you do to what the outcome is. It is possible that, let's say, you come up with a model today, it doesn't work today, but it works 3 years down the line. Or let's say you do something, but whatever you're doing is just 50%. So because there's another organization that's trying to bring the other 50% with you, both of you together are able to solve a problem. So it's important to be perseverant and resilient and be open to any kind of collaboration, learning, partnerships on the as you kind of move forward in your journey. So sorry for the long answer, but 3 things that I think my learnings have been: one is very deep understanding of the user, so empathy with the user. Second is good top-down structured problem solving, so that you have very sharp thought process on what is the problem, what solutions might work, not work. And third is just pure resilience, to say that we'll stay on for as long as it takes, obviously with openness to collaborate with others, because we are not the only ones doing it.
Okay, I think that is a great note to end our very first episode. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with our listeners and also for the important advice that you gave to the youth who are listening to us today and who would want to explore the space of social impact. Thank you, Aayush, for that very pertinent and effective piece of advice that you shared with our young change makers. And of course, thank you so much for making the time today to share your experiences with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
The pleasure was all ours. For all our listeners, if you wish to get in touch with Aayush, you can find him on his socials. The handles and its details will be mentioned in the description. And for those of our listeners who wish to join us in our journey of change making, you can find our details as well in the description box. And we'll see you again in the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in.